Well, welcome everybody to our online program on addiction and recovery from the Sunshine Coast Health Centre up here in Powell River, British Columbia. And our topic, Rob Ford, the Mayor of Toronto. Everybody else has been talking about him, so might as well jump into it. But I'm not so much interested in Mayor Ford as I am in this article that came out in the Star. It was on the online version of it. And the title of it, I have it right here, is What Mayor Ford Could Expect If He Were to Enter Rehab. It's quite an interesting article. It says, for example, it makes all these great pronouncements about addicts, assuming that Mayor Ford is in fact an addict. So it makes this comment, he will learn that the great genius of the addict is for self-deception. And, here's a good one. He will be told that the mind that brought him to this state will hardly be the tool to get him out of it. He will have to follow instruction. That's interesting. Making this comment that the very way someone with an addiction problem makes sense of things is so warped that the person can't even trust their own thinking anymore. Can't trust their own mind. So that's kind of interesting. Another comment in this article was he'll discover that emotional maturity is inherent to the ailment. So all addicts are emotionally immature, which is actually kind of an interesting concept. I've always wondered about, for example, Eugene O'Neill, the great Nobel Prize winning playwright who was clearly an alcoholic and wrote a great deal of his work on why he became an alcoholic. And I'm thinking the Nobel Prize Committee thought it worthy enough to give out a prize, and most of us who are interested in literature generally think that these great writers are actually quite sophisticated emotionally. But to make this comment, which is, we hear this a lot, that there's something immature about the addict, is always a curious one. There's been a lot of research on this, by the way, and the research is fairly clear that anybody, a therapist, if a therapist passes this judgment on a client, that the client is emotionally immature, what the researchers discovered was this says way more about the therapists than it does about the reality of the client. It's one of those interesting judgments that people tend to make. And the psychologists who are interested in things like emotional maturity, some of them, for example, Abraham Maslow, you might have heard of him, famous fellow, he says actually very few people are emotionally mature. The vast majority of people actually are immature. So, to call someone emotionally immature, well, we're calling just about everybody else emotionally immature, so what's the point? Anyway, that was an interesting little thing. But this whole article, it's quite interesting in the sense that it reflects the kind of treatment that we might expect because we watched Michael Keaton in Clean and Sober, this very old form of treatment for addiction. And that basically says the addict is out of control, they can't be trusted. How do you know an addict is lying? Right? The lips are moving. So by virtue of having an addiction, anything the person says must be a lie. By virtue of having an addiction, the person must be selfish, or monumental selfishness, as the article says. By virtue of having an addiction, the person must be in denial. By virtue of having an addiction, the person must be arrogant. By virtue of having an addiction, the person's life is complete chaos and there's no order or discipline to it at all. All of these arguments are really quite fascinating because what they're basically saying is the individual complex human being really doesn't matter that much. Because by the fact of having an addiction, this means that this individual has certain personality traits and certain skills that are common among all addicts. So that when we deal with the addict in treatment, we're no longer dealing with a complex, unique individual. We're dealing with someone who clearly has personality traits of narcissism, who clearly is in denial. All of this idea that that who they are as a person has been dictated to by having an addiction, rather than the rest of us. We just grow up and we have certain personality traits and we act certain ways in certain situations, and then a lot of our identity and how we make sense of ourselves is based on the story we tell ourselves of who we are and what the world is like and how we fit in the world. Anyway, I thought we would just spend some time looking at this idea that, addicts all, this is their treatment. We have to basically rifle through everything. We have to take control of the, he can go out on pass, but only after, a few weeks after, he's followed all the rules and all that. And the idea that we have to do this because the addict is so completely incompetent and incapable of even trusting their own thought, right? And then compare that to maybe there's a different form of therapy that if Rob Ford were to enter rehab, he might be exposed to, and not this therapy that is promoted by Hollywood and by this article in the Star. So one of the things, if Rob Ford or anyone else were to go into a rehab, they'd probably be treated as a whole complex human being. This idea that addicts all share some kind of personality traits. By the way, there's not a shred of research that backs this up. 50 years of intense research trying to find the mysterious addictive personality or something we haven't found even a shred of evidence. Apparently, as Jefferson Singer has pointed out and many others, that addicts are as various as the wide mix of society. There's nothing particularly special that we can actually understand about who succumbs to addiction. But anyway, this idea actually came around with a very famous fellow who was attached, he called himself a sideline observer to Alcoholics Anonymous, a fellow by the name of Harry Tiebout. And Harry Tiebout was a psychiatrist trained in Freud's method of therapy, which is called psychoanalysis. And Harry Tiebout, in 1944, after, dealing with some alcoholics, including Bill Wilson, the creator of AA, he decided that they were a bunch of self-centered people who were intent on preserving this ego, this self image that they had of themselves at all costs, and would be arrogant and any number of other things. And this work of Tiebout in 1944 was even published in 1990. And it's amazing, too, if you rifle through some of the research literature on addiction, that you find some psychiatrists still hang on to this. Most psychiatrists now are trained in the modern kind of psychodynamics, modern Freudian theory, which has very little to do with the original stuff, and a lot of them are actually based on brain chemistry and in what we call cognitive neuroscience and cognitive psychology. So radical shit, but that's not what Harry Tiebout was in. And it's amazing that this idea that Tiebout came up with, that all alcoholics share these certain personality traits and things like denial, and this is so powerful and continues to be in our society till November the 9th, 2013. We even see people writing about it as if this was like some sort of accepted thing in the field. Versus most therapists, I think, would see anyone that they treat with an addiction as this complex human being and try to understand who the human being was, how they made sense of the world, and not sort of impose some kind of personality structure on them. Yeah. And it's an interesting thing. And again, just to point out that maybe there are different ways that people are treated in rehab. Anyway, we'll be back next time with another little comment on our Star article on Rob Ford.